What Studios, and this is my podcast, What Makes You Smarter. It's an extension of the RadioWhat.com internet radio station that I've been running for quite some time. And if you need DJ services, where do you go? DJLittleRock.com. One more time, DJLittleRock.com. Check availability and get a free price quote, and maybe you can have me at your next event. I'd like to party with the people. The people need to be entertained. Make your next thing a big one. Also, if you'd like to tell your story or hear the stories of others, I encourage you to check out my other podcast, What Makes You Famous. Find it everywhere using the hashtag What Makes You Famous. Now, on with the show. Today on the program, 10 things you need to know today for Sunday, August 9th, 2020. 10 things you need to know today. Number 1, Trump attempts to bypass Congress with coronavirus relief executive orders. President Trump on Saturday announced multiple executive actions aiming to extend economic aid to Americans while Congress remains in a stalemate over the next coronavirus relief package. The effectiveness and legality of the measures were unclear, however, with the orders seemingly exceeding constitutional limits on executive power. The president said during a press conference at his golf club in Bedminster, New Jersey, that via executive order, he will unilaterally continue expanded unemployment benefits at $400 per week rather than the previous $600 per week. He also signed orders intended to pause student loan payments and extend the moratorium on evictions. Additionally, Trump said the action authorizes the Treasury Department to defer payroll taxes for Americans making less than $100,000 per year. This is according to the Associated Press and Bloomberg. Number 2, U.S. nears 5 million coronavirus cases. The United States is nearing 5 million confirmed coronavirus cases, while the death attributed to COVID-19 crossed 162,000. The U.S. continues to lead the world in both categories and accounts for about a quarter of global cases. The pandemic remains a serious problem, but some states that have been hit hard by the virus in recent weeks, like Arizona and Florida, have shown some encouraging signs of improvement thanks to renewed lockdown measures. Elsewhere, Brazil became the second country after the U.S. to reach the grim milestone of 100,000 confirmed coronavirus deaths. Data collected by Johns Hopkins University shows. This is according to CNN and Fox News. Number 3, Afghan government to release 400 Taliban prisoners, setting up peace talks. An Afghan Grand Assembly of Elders, known as the Loya Jirga, on Sunday passed a resolution to release 400 Taliban prisoners, and President Ashraf Ghani said he will sign the order, effectively removing the final barrier to peace talks between the government and the Taliban, who have been in conflict for decades. The United States and the Taliban had previously agreed the latter would enter talks with Afghan government if it released 5,000 prisoners, most of whom have already been freed. But Kabul was hesitant to release the final 400, many of whom were accused of serious offenses, with more than 150 of them on death row. Some civilians and human rights groups are wary of the move, but negotiations between the factions are expected to begin next week in Qatar. This is according to Al Jazeera and the BBC. Number 4, Azar arrives in Taiwan for coronavirus discussions. U.S. Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar arrived in Taiwan on Sunday, making him the highest level American cabinet official to visit the island since the break in formal diplomatic relations between Washington and Taipei in 1979. That break was a concession to China, which claims Taiwan as a territory. So, unsurprisingly, Beijing quickly condemned Azar's visit, which the Financial Times called a sign of a, quote, strategic shift, end quote, in U.S. diplomacy. Azar is set to meet with Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen and health officials during the 3-day trip, during which they are expected to discuss the coronavirus pandemic. Taiwan, despite its proximity to China, where the virus originated, has recorded fewer than 500 coronavirus cases and only 7 deaths since the pandemic began. This is according to ABC News and the Financial Times. Number 5, anti-government protest erupt in Beirut. Thousands of protesters gathered in Beirut Martyrs Square on Saturday, calling for Lebanon's politicians to resign and be held accountable for the negligence that led to a blast in the city's port Tuesday that killed 158 people and injured more than 6,000. During the demonstrations, the protesters stormed Beirut's government ministries and trashed the offices of the Association of Lebanese Banks, Reuters reports. Police reportedly fired tear gas at demonstrators trying to break through a barrier and to get the parliament building. And one of the officers reportedly was killed when he fell into an elevator shaft after being chased into a building by protesters, another officer said. The Red Cross said it treated 117 people for injuries, while another 55 were taken to hospitals. This is according to Reuters and Al Jazeera. Number 6, Portland authorities declare riot after protesters set fire to police union building. Authorities declared a riot in Portland, Oregon, after a group of protesters set fire to a police union building late Saturday night. The flames were reportedly quickly extinguished. The 3 officers were hurt during efforts to clear the crowd outside of the building, 2 of whom were taken to the hospital. They have since been released. The gatherings in Portland this week have been noticeably smaller than in previous weeks when federal authorities were still controversially stationed in the city. The Associated Press reports, although their withdrawal has not led to a complete halt to the sometimes violent demonstrations. This is according to the Associated Press and the Oregonian. Number 7, Aramcos net income falls 50%. Oil giant Saudi Aramco's net income dropped 50% in the first half of its financial year, a figure representative of how intensely the coronavirus pandemic has rattled oil markets. Net income for the world's largest crude producer plunged to $23.2 billion over the first 6 months. In the same period in 2019, the company reported a net income of $46.9 billion. The company also said it would continue paying a quarterly dividend of $18.75 billion, far higher than its cash flow. The New York Times notes, Amin Nasser, Aramco's president and CEO, did say, quote, "The worst is likely behind us," end quote, adding that, quote, "We remain positive about the long-term demand for oil," end quote. The market has indeed stabilized since oil prices briefly went negative in April, but prices are still down significantly. This is according to CNBC and the New York Times. Number 8, Twitter reportedly had preliminary discussions about combining with TikTok. Twitter has reportedly had preliminary discussions about joining forces with TikTok, the Wall Street Journal reports. The latter, a popular video sharing act owned by a Chinese parent company, faces a ban in the United States unless it can find a U.S. buyer by September 15th, President Trump has said. Microsoft, whose market capitalization is far larger than Twitter's, appears to be the leading candidate to take over the app, making Twitter a long-shot bidder. It's unclear how serious the social platform is about making a play, but the Journal notes it does hold at least one advantage over Microsoft in that it would face less antitrust scrutiny thanks to its smaller size. This is according to the Wall Street Journal. Number 9, Belarus heads to the polls for presidential election. Voters in Belarus cast their presidential election ballots Sunday. Longtime incumbent President Alexander Lukashenko, commonly referred to as, quote, Europe's last dictator, end quote, is facing Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, A former teacher, Tika Novoskaya, was selected to run for the opposition after authorities cracked down on various opposition figures, including her husband, who has been in jail since May. Now, Tikhanovskaya has gone into hiding herself, her campaign said, after police detained several of her senior staffers in what appeared to be an attempt to intimidate the opposition ahead of the vote. The campaign made it clear, however, that the candidates did not flee Minsk, the capital, and is instead spending the night away from her home. End quote, so that she is not alone. End quote. Tikhanovskaya reportedly represents the strongest challenge to Lukashenko during his 26-year rule, and her campaign rallies saw large turnouts, even in small towns. This is according to Deutsche Welle and CNN. Number 10, MAC becomes first FBS conference to cancel college football season. Amid the Mid-American Conference postponed all fall sports Saturday due to the coronavirus pandemic. The decision makes the MAC the first FBS conference to forego a football season this year. MAC Commissioner John Steinbrecher said, quote, "There are simply too many unknowns for us to put our student athletes in situations that are not clearly understood," end quote. But it seems that financial costs were also a concern, especially since many of the schools would lose revenue from already canceled games against major conference teams. The league isn't giving up all hope of seeing its student athletes get back on the field, though. The conference is looking into ways to move the affected sports to the spring, and ESPN has reportedly said it's open to fitting televised games into its broadcast schedule next year. This is according to ESPN and The Ringer. That's 10 things you need to know today for Sunday, August 9th, 2020. Thank you so much for listening and putting up with my stumbling through all these things. Some of those names, that one name, I'm so sorry. I know I butchered it several times. Words hard, names harder. This has been What Makes You Smarter. I'm KeysDAN. Also, if you'd like to tell your story or hear the stories of others, I encourage you to give me a call at 501-470-6386 and to be on the What Makes You Famous podcast. Hashtag What Makes You Famous. That's it for me. It's KeysDAN, RadioWhat.com, DJLittleRock.com. Peace.